Welcome back, everybody, to Bold Like a Leopard. We're going to talk a little about the 2020 candidates that are coming into the election, that have declared their candidacy or that might declare their candidacy. Now, I am going to be sharing this probably with one of my YouTube friends, Mad Dodge Productions, aka the Mad Libertarian. And, basically, I want to thank him for, looking at my content and considering the opinions and observations I'm putting forward. So you can see here, this is a kind of a snapshot of some of the possible candidates that are in there. Of course, you have President Trump, Vermont Senator Bernie Sanders, Vice President Biden, Senator Cory Booker from New Jersey. You have Senator Kirsten Gillibrand from New York, Senator Kamala Harris from California, Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson is still being rumored, and you also have billionaire Mark Cuban, known from Shark Tank on MSNBC, or CNBC rather. So, if you want a larger list of candidates, there are a number of people who have already declared their candidacy. Julian Castro, who we'll probably cover sometime this week or next week. John Delaney, a former congressman from Maryland. Tulsi Gabbard from Hawaii. Richard Ojeda from Virginia, and Donald Trump, as well as Elizabeth Warren, who has seemingly announced that she is going to be considering running for president. So she has an exploratory committee. That's something that is formed in order to begin raising money. However, it should be noted that the famous Democratic activist and billionaire Tom Steyer has announced that he's not going to be running for president, and he's going to continue trying to lobby Congress to impeach Donald Trump. So today we're going to deal with Tulsi Gabbard, and we'll go first through a number of the positions that Gabbard holds. So she's very strongly pro-choice. She was sponsor of the Women's Health Protection Act. She was endorsed by Emily's List, opposed the work welfare requirement in 2013, opposed the TPP in 2015, which we'll hear about in a second. She has a strong stance on environmental regulations, including anti-fracking, as well as a number of renewable energy initiatives.
Now, I've heard from local manufacturers, local small business owners, as well as working men and women, both here in Hawaii and across the country, and they've expressed deep concern and, frankly, a lot of fear about what this trade deal may do to them. They saw what happened during NAFTA, how these trade deals benefit large corporations at the expense of them and their hard work and our local economy. So as Congress goes through this 90-day period of review, I'm going to do everything I can to make sure that their voices are heard and that we oppose this trade deal that will have devastatingly negative impacts on the American people and our domestic economy. The impact of this trade deal really can't be overstated enough. It's the largest trade deal in history, which covers 40% of the globe's economy. When you look at it, this deal is like NAFTA on steroids. It will be just as unenforceable with far greater negative impacts than we saw with that last trade deal, NAFTA. You know, I've heard from manufacturers here locally, small business owners locally, as well as local families here in Hawaii and across the country who've expressed great fear that they will see the outcome of this trade agreement being just as devastating to them and to our domestic economy as NAFTA was. And it's for them that I will be working hard on the floor of the House to make sure that this deal is not approved in Congress.
Okay, now she's also been known for her criticism of the party. Here she is after she accused the DNC of deliberately skewing the Democratic primary process in 2016.
Earlier today, we heard from Donna Brazil that what many people had suspected for a long time has turned out to be true. The DNC secretly chose their nominee over a year before the primary elections even occurred. This shines a light on how deeply broken our campaign finance laws are and how they've weakened individual candidates while strengthening and empowering political parties and special interests. These laws essentially allowed the Clinton campaign to bypass individual campaign contribution limits by funneling millions of dollars through the DNC and state parties, taking control of the DNC in the process. Along with the recent retaliatory purge of Bernie Sanders and Keith Ellison supporters from the DNC's executive committee, this is just further evidence that the DNC needs to be completely overhauled to take our party back from the special interests of a powerful few and put it back in the hands of the people. We must bring about real campaign finance reform. We must get rid of the undemocratic system of superdelegates. We must implement open or same-day registration in Democratic primaries to actually encourage voter engagement. We must care more about people than protecting the status quo. No more games, no more retaliation, no more picking of winners and losers. We must act now to take back our party, a party that belongs to the people, and fight for a new path forward that is open, transparent, and accountable, and that strengthens our democracy.
So there's another area where the Democrats and Tulsi Gabbard also happen to disagree. That's where she is a huge opponent of any intervention in Syria. In fact, she's opposed literally all of the initiatives to go in there and create no-fly zones and various interventions where there would be boots on the ground or otherwise, or even air support. So here is her in January 2017 talking to Tucker Carlson.
Well, Syrian President Bashar al-Assad has an unlikely defender, Congresswoman Tulsi Gabbard. At some personal risk, the Hawaii Democrat recently made a secret 7-day trip to Syria and Lebanon, where she met Assad along with many civilians and clergy and soldiers caught up in the conflict there. When she came back, she denounced the previous administration's efforts to depose Assad as both illegal and harmful to the Syrian people and American interests. What did she see there? Congresswoman Gabbard is with us tonight. Congresswoman, thanks a lot for joining us.
Thank you very much.
So you met with Assad. Not many people can say that. And Donald Trump, of course, at the same time has been emphasizing his plan to take on ISIS directly. We're not exactly sure what that means. But based on your conversation with President Assad, do you think the Assad government would welcome an alliance with the U.S. military to fight ISIS?
First of all, in your intro, I just want to make a correction. I'm not a defender of Assad. I didn't go to Syria to meet with Assad. It was not even part of the plan initially. I went there to visit with the Syrian people, to share the care, the love, and the aloha that the people of our country have for them, and to see the situation on the ground for myself. When the opportunity presented itself to meet with President Assad, I took it simply because I believe that if we profess to care for the Syrian people, if we want to end the suffering for them, we have to be willing to meet with whomever we need to in order to accomplish that. And that was much of what I discussed with him in that meeting, was how do we get to a place where we can end this war, where the terrorists in his country can be defeated, terrorists like al-Qaeda and ISIS and all of these other groups that are working with them, and make it so that the Syrian people are able to move on with their lives, to make it so that the Syrian refugees who have fled Syria to not only the Middle East, but Europe and other parts of the world are able to return home.
So, I mean, but what do you say about U.S. policy? I mean, you spoke to him. Again, not many people have done that recently. Is he open to some sort of alliance with the United States, assuming the Trump administration is open to that as well? What did Assad say to you?
I think he is looking for what our president, new president, Donald Trump, would see as a shared interest with him, with Syria. And the shared interest that he has seen is this commitment to defeating ISIS, this commitment to defeating this terrorist threat that not only exists for the people of Syria, but it exists for the Middle East and for the world. And if this threat continues to grow, it's something, again, that becomes even more real than it is already for the American people.
Now, why?
So that is something that gives you kind of an idea of what Tulsi Gabbard is professing in terms of foreign policy. She has kind of a zigzag record in terms of some other issues. You know, a lot of people Republicans and Democrats kind of split down about the Israel-Palestine issue. She has met with the pro-Israel group Christians United for Israel and Sheldon Adelson and Shmuley Boteach, who are huge pro-Israel supporters. I think that among Democrats who would be interested in the 2020 election, that could be a liability because they are increasingly trending towards the left, towards the Palestinians. Then again, there is a large faction within the Democratic Party that does continue to be pro-Israel. Just putting that out there. So now we get to the question of what does the left have with Tulsi Gabbard? What's their problem? And for that, I turn to Michael Tracy, who I happen to think is one of the better left-wing journalists left in media, although he has been laid off from the Young Turks. He is one of the people who has consistently pushed back against the mainstream narrative concerning Russiagate and concerning the DNC tampering in the 2016 election. So this is his article from November, and he says, few contemporary American political figures generate such unique disdain as Tulsi Gabbard, Democratic Congresswoman from Hawaii. The disdain is not unique for its tenacity. Plenty of figures are on the receiving end of bitter criticism, but for its political composition. Gabbard straddles an ideological fissure that spans the Democratic and Republican Party coalitions in ways that are difficult to pin down. Despite being an avowed progressive on policy issues and a frequent critic of President Trump, her most committed antagonists appear on the left. The consternation perhaps began in earnest during the 2016 presidential cycle when she resigned as a vice chair from the Democratic National Committee to endorse Bernie Sanders, and in so doing cast stark aspersion on Hillary Clinton's foreign policy judgment. This created seeds of doubt among liberals that she was a double agent of sorts, operating within the Democratic Party for the stealth purpose of undermining its cohesion and causing problems. It wasn't just that she supported Sanders, which was well and good, but that she drilled down so specifically on one of the eventual nominee's most searing vulnerabilities, the fact that Clinton had supported every major American military misadventure of the past 15 years and showed no signs of penitence or personal evolution. Though Gabbard later conceded she would vote for Clinton in the general election, her support was always tepid and even slightly pained. Gabbard's path to excommunication accelerated when Trump won the election, as she was among the very few Democrats who opted for conciliatory tack. She visited Trump Tower during the presidential transition period, armed with the express intention to dissuade the president-elect from further entangling the U.S. in efforts to oust Syrian despot Bashar al-Assad. The suspicions of her motives intensified among liberal activists and journalists who could not fathom why any self-respecting Democrat would want to do anything at that juncture other than shout resistance slogans and furiously retweet Russia collusion memes. Although she initially offered to work with Trump and offered constructive policy guidance, another disgraceful capitulation by the lights of many liberals, her criticism grew more pointed as Trump's term progressed. But still, Gabbard never quite embraced the kind of turbocharged anti-Trump mentality that so often defines Democratic activist sensibilities. Instead, her criticisms have always been targeted and substantive rather than flamboyant and overly personal. Although it should be noted that many successful Democratic congressional candidates also steadfastly avoided overly personalized criticism of Trump during the midterm campaigns and were applauded for this as a wise tactical choice. Gabbard followed a similar strategy from the outset, with the difference perhaps being the issues she chose to emphasize: national security and foreign policy, which activates reflexes that are less reliably partisan and sortable than when the focus is on healthcare or taxes. So essentially, what is discussed in this article is that Tulsi Gabbard did try to find common ground with the president on the one issue that was most important to her, which was intervention in the Middle East. Trump supporters sometimes profess that Gabbard is one of the few Democrats they find palatable. I find that to be true, probably because she seems to avoid the culture war brawling that so often comes across as tedious and shrill when filtered through the contemporary left-wing moralizing lingo. All that said, her positions are still almost entirely progressive by any normal measure, with a few possible exceptions that her liberal antagonists frequently highlight. This creates an unusual paradox in her public perception. Seeming palatable to Trump supporters automatically evokes suspicion among liberals as evidence of some lurking moral turpitude. Her visit to Bashar al-Assad in January 2017, along with former Democratic Congressman and presidential candidate Dennis Kucinich, was the last straw for enemies whose antipathy toward her had been simmering and craved an attack line to coalesce around. The meeting was fully in keeping with her broader campaigning to discourage reckless regime change and misadventures, the same position which caused her to express extreme skepticism of Clinton. So let's look at some of those criticisms that are being leveled at her. So one is that she had a number of homophobic remarks, and yes, there are certain things that she said that were decidedly hostile towards the idea of gay marriage at the time. Here, for example, is one where she says, to try to act as if there is a difference between civil unions and same-sex marriage is dishonest, cowardly, and extremely disrespectful to the people of Hawaii, said Representative Tulsi Gabbard Tamayo, who directed her testimony at Hamakawa. As Democrats, we should be representing the views of the people and not a small number of homosexual extremists. So this is Andrew Kaczynski, who's the K-File guy from CNN. Very famous. He's the one who did the whole CNN blackmail saga back in 2017, where they tried to dox a member of the 4chan network. In any case, he says, I realized Tulsi Gabbard was anti-gay, but didn't quite realize how anti-gay she was in the 2000s. This is next level. In one instance, in February 2004, Gabbard, at the time a 22-year-old state representative, was testifying against a bill aimed at legalizing same-sex civil unions. So it repeats the quote here. 6 months later, Gabbard spoke more candidly while replying to an email originally sent to her father, Mike Gabbard, who was a Republican city councilman in Honolulu running for Congress. I smell a skunk, Gabbard told Honolulu Magazine. She was responding to an email that was originally addressed to her father, asking about his ties to the leader of a Hare Krishna movement in Hawaii, according to the magazine. It's clear to me that you're acting as a conduit for the Honolulu Weekly and other homosexual extremist supporters of Ed Case. Gabbard was elected to the U.S. House in 2012 and became the first Hindu member of Congress, as well as one of Congress' first female combat veterans. She quickly became a star of the Democratic Party with her own rogue brand of progressive leadership. Gabbard's remarks from 14 years ago were bound to resurface as she walked even further into the national spotlight with her presidential bid. And while Gabbard, 37, has evolved since then, she once backed a bill targeting discrimination based on sexual orientation and famously endorsed Bernie Sanders' presidential bid at the expense of her post as Democratic National Home Committee vice chair. Some people, including journalists from Hawaii to D.C., wouldn't let her off easy for her homophobic remarks. So this is Peter Fox. I don't know who this is, but he says Tulsi Gabbard referred to gay people as homosexual extremists and sided with Assad over Obama, to name a few concerns. Next. Then this person says, so she'll co-sponsor bills supporting LGBTQ rights, but still personally thinks they're icky. Then this person says, Tulsi Gabbard is a flat no for many reasons, including this one. And they're all citing Andrew Kaczynski's so-called digging up of the records. But I can tell you that if you look into the histories of many of the top Democratic politicians, going back 20 to 30 years, almost none of them supported gay marriage back during the time of the big fight over it. In fact, Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama at the time of the 2008 presidential campaign, when they were both running in the primary, both affirmed that they support the definition of marriage as between a man and a woman. I will try to put those links below. So therefore, I think that this type of criticism is empty. This was a time when the majority of the Democratic Party was not explicitly pro-gay marriage, and for them to hold her accountable as opposed to a lot of the other politicians that were leading the party would seem to be the pot calling the kettle black. Here is another criticism concerning the issue of the Knights of Columbus. So the Hawaii delegation in Congress has long been known as one of the most tightly knit in Washington, but that tradition was shattered this week when Representative Tulsi Gabbard publicly criticized fellow Democrat Senator Mazie Hirono's questioning of a judicial nominee. Gabbard, who announced Friday that she was decided to run for president in 2020, made headlines and provoked an irritated response from Hirono earlier in the week by implicitly accusing the senator and other Democrats in an op-ed published in The Hill of having weaponized religion for their own selfish gain. In their questioning, while Gabbard did not mention Hirono by name, her fellow Hawaiians clearly saw the op-ed as friendly fire. Hirono, an outspoken critic of President Trump, returned fire in a statement that dinged Gabbard for giving ammo to Trump's right-wing allies. Over the years, the senator has been attacked by right-wing ideologues for her examination of Donald Trump's ideologically driven nominees to the courts. And it is unfortunate that Congresswoman Gabbard based her misguided opinion on the far right-wing manipulation of these straightforward questions, says Will Dempster, Hirono's spokesman, said in a statement. A spokesman for Gabbard did not respond to a request for comment. Gabbard's spokeswoman Lauren McIlvain, in a statement to the Washington Post, said Gabbard will always fight for religious freedom and oppose religious bigotry, no matter where it comes from or to whom it's directed. Congresswoman Tulsi Gabbard respects Senator Hirono, McIlvain said. She added that no nominee for public service should be disqualified either directly or indirectly because of their religious affiliation. So what they're referring to is that there was a judicial nominee. I don't have the precise name here, but let me see. They referred to Al Smith, who was a earlier presidential candidate in the 1920s, who was attacked for being Catholic, as well as John F. Kennedy. But this judicial nominee happens to be Brian Busher, who is Trump's nominee for the U.S. District Court in Nebraska. So we have Mazie Hirono was actually questioning him regarding his membership of the organization. She said the Knights of Columbus has taken a number of extreme positions. Hirono wrote in the questionnaire, for example, it was reportedly one of the top contributors to California's Proposition 8 campaign to ban same-sex marriage. Harris referred to the group as an all-male society and took issue with their positions on abortion and other culture war issues. Were you aware that the Knights of Columbus opposed the woman's right to choose when you joined the organization? Harris queried. The condemnation from conservatives was swift. This isn't just about the Knights of Columbus or Catholics. This is an ongoing attack from the extremist left of the Democratic Party to silence people of faith and run them out of engaging in public service based on their religious beliefs. Penny Nance, the president of Concerned Women for America, wrote in a statement. So that was basically, and they actually do cite Tulsi Gabbard. It says, but I was especially encouraged to see Representative Tulsi Gabbard, Democrat of Hawaii, a newly announced presidential candidate, call out members of her own party for weaponizing religion. So you do see Republicans giving her credit where credit is due about this type of religious, I guess, pursuance is what I would call it, or religious questioning. And then another issue where people are taking notice, of course, is this headline, which says the Tulsi Gabbard's 2020 plan threatens the new left foreign policy of Sanders and Warren. Representative Tulsi Gabbard told CNN on Friday that she definitely will seek the 2020 Democratic nomination for president, ending months of speculation. Her bid makes sense on its face. Democrats swept the 2018 midterm elections with a crop of young candidates like Gabbard, many of them with public service backgrounds and from historically underrepresented communities. But she says, or rather he says later, Gabbard's language is that of the old left, holding up the U.S. government as obsessed with unwisely projecting its influence, often for the sake of moneyed interests, and she asserts in secretive, risky ways while neglecting its own people at home. It's a mode that echoes the kind of anti-elite talk that Trump built his campaign around while he lied about his past position on the invasion of Iraq. Why have politicians of both parties gotten Americans trapped in these faraway places? And it connects seamlessly to another Trump-style view, a deep skepticism of foreigners, particularly Muslims. Gabbard has voted to make it harder for refugees from Iraq and Syria to enter the U.S., courted Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi despite his links to anti-Muslim violence that killed hundreds, and spent years as a Fox News darling for her willingness to claim President Barack Obama was making Americans less safe by supporting Arab rebels in Syria and not using the phrase radical Islam. Obama aides and many experts warn that language risks implying a problem inherent in a religion followed by 1.6 billion people. Gabbard and Trump argued the language is essential to explain the rise of groups like the Islamic State. What Sanders and Warren have tried to do, notably in our series of recent speeches, is offer a vision of a new left that addresses voters' deep skepticism of U.S. adventurism abroad, while veering toward the idea that the world can't be fixed and that's just not America's problem. They're rejecting the old school internationalism associated with Clinton and many Republicans' idea that U.S.-led diplomacy combined with smart limited use of force is the key to world order. They have challenged the notion that it's essential to appear tough in the face of traditional adversaries like Russia for the sake of American global standing. Instead, they're talking about multilateral efforts to improve the lives of U.S. citizens as well as people abroad. So what we're seeing here is basically this rearguard action on behalf of a number of higher-ranking Democratic politicians, and you could even lump Sanders into there, where they're saying, well, Tulsi Gabbard, she's okay on the face of it. She's a nice person, but she is too extreme. She is Islamophobic. She's homophobic. She's phobophobic. All of these other things that are basically thrown at candidates, and you can even see in that piece earlier, the one about the foreign policy, that they're trying to tie her statements to Donald Trump rather than take them on account of her her own unique position within the Democratic Party. So when she goes to meet Bashar al-Assad, they do the same thing as they did with Denis Kucinich. They claim that she's coddling a dictator. Now, I myself, I don't think I would meet with Bashar al-Assad. I'm not a representative of Congress, and I think that she could have probably made an effort to keep the U.S. out of an intervention in Syria without meeting with Bashar al-Assad. But that's me. I think that ultimately her position is correct in trying to do whatever she can to avoid U.S. intervention in a conflict that I don't see a clear gateway to a resolution. The other issue that I'm seeing with Tulsi Gabbard and the rest of the Democratic Party is that they will never, ever, ever allow someone like this to get enough of enough public attention to seriously challenge the nomination. They did the same thing with Bernie Sanders in 2016. They tried to limit the amount of bandwidth that he received in the media. They basically would rather have covered Donald Trump, who they hated and who they wanted to show as this wild man, rather than present a candidate who could possibly be an alternative not only from the Republican candidate but from the Democratic establishment. And personally, I would say yes, Tulsi Gabbard of the Democratic candidates today is probably the only one who would warrant any consideration for me, because she seems committed absolutely to pursuing her own policy agenda rather than kowtowing to the Democratic establishment. I think that it would be a mistake for any Democrat to try to box her out of the campaign, or even if you don't support her. I think that people should appropriately accept her position in the campaign and let the debate happen and let her go up against some of these front-running candidates like Joe Biden and Beto O'Rourke. However, I know the way that the party works. I know the way that the media works. And I seriously doubt she's going to get a fair shake in the primary. Now, I'll be honest. I would rather have somebody with a much more conservative economic position, conservative libertarian economic position, as well as somebody who is pro-life and pro-Second Amendment. I don't think that Tulsi Gabbard would line up very much with a lot of my other views, but I think that she's certainly somebody that people from across the spectrum can respect for both her integrity and the lack of commitment that she has to the establishment. So that's about it. Please like this video, subscribe to my channel, subscribe to Mad Libertarian's channel, Mad Productions, also to my other channel, Razor Ray Special Cuts on YouTube, as well as my channels on Cocoscope and on BitChute. And let me know, what do you think about Tulsi Gabbard? And you can follow me on Gab, Twitter, Minds, all those other places. Let me know what you think, and have a great night.